when I pitch my bosses on stories, and by the way, reporters love to do these kinds of stories. The issue is not reporter interest, the issue is editor interest. And editors are these bulldogs that view themselves, many times often so, as representative of the public, busy with other things, not enough room, not enough time. And so, reporters and therefore stakeholders have to get savvy in how you pitch these stories. For example, traffic jams is something that everyone can relate to. Well, of course, we all know why there are traffic jams many times, or higher home prices, or lower home prices, or flooding in certain areas. There are all kinds of opportunities to pitch your stories so that it can use one incident or one angle to open up a much broader story. I mean, we all saw this map here. My jaw dropped here. That's a hell of a story. To see these neighborhoods that under certain circumstances could be inundated. I've done a story similar to that, but with less compelling data. And our angle, my pitch to my boss, which ultimately led to a story, was homes. Are we building homes? Is your neighborhood in an area that's now vulnerable that we didn't know before? So those are the kinds of hooks and angles that I think still have potential. I mean, I'm still a big believer in television news, and I'll tell you why. Because we have these tools. We have the spoken word. We have the moving picture. We have emotion. We can allow the viewer to look into the eyes of the person making a statement and make a judgment. We can transport a viewer to a certain time and place. Words can do a magnificent job. Radio can do a magnificent job. But when you sit down in front of an evening newscast or a morning newscast, if there's still news in the morning, you never know what the next story is going to be. So you're never preaching to the choir. You'll be reaching viewers that don't necessarily have a predisposed interest in that topic. Books can't do that. Documentaries can't do that. Even newspapers, which have headlines, you go and you judge the headline, you decide if you're interested, and you read that story. Not so with television news and to an extent radio, because people never know what the next story is going to be. And that's the real value I see, and the great hope that we can get these kinds of important stories back on the public agenda.
Thank you very much. Matt?
Sure. Well, I guess I'm a bit more optimistic. I mean, Jeff, you certainly had a note of optimism, but in terms of the struggles, I mean, I do think certainly the news media is getting splintered, and there are multiple platforms that news is delivered on. But nevertheless, I still think we come back to the same basics. And with land use, at the end of the day, there are few issues that impact how people live more than land use decisions. I mean, whether it's traffic, whether you could relate childhood obesity to it. You could obviously relate the whole idea of people living in communities with a real sense of community and a sense of place. But being able to talk about it in those terms and in terms that people can relate to rather than sort of the land use jargon, to me is the trick. But it can be done. I know that, for example, I've written a lot about the urban development boundary in Miami-Dade County. Well, that now is very well understood by voters. Not long ago, was talking with someone who represents a lobbyist for developers, who had tried to move the urban development boundary, and we'd written a lot of stories trying to shine light on what the stakes were and what they were trying to do, and ultimately they withdrew the application. And incidentally, real quick, the urban development boundary in Miami-Dade County is a line that runs along the western and southern edges of the county, which limits large-scale development outside its borders. And developers have tried to move it so that they could erect more subdivisions further and further out from the city center. And this lobbyist said, we did some polling, and we found that everyone knew it, and in fact, there was an overwhelming feeling against moving the urban development boundary, and that's what ultimately prompted us not to go forward. This was in the last 2 years. So you can connect on these issues. Green building. I can remember 4 years ago, maybe it was actually less, 3 years ago, a conference in the city of Miami on green building, and developers walked in, and I can assure you most of the developers looking around had little idea any of the. They didn't know what LEED stood for. They didn't They didn't know what the U.S. Green Building Council is. And suddenly, though, within the last few years, we've seen one building after another. Either existing buildings race to get LEED accreditation, or new buildings going up bragging about how they're LEED. So I think, and we can't forget, just in the city of Miami as well, they passed the Miami 21 zoning code. That's been called by some outside observers as the most progressive zoning code in the entire country. Well, it's happening right here. And in part, there was plenty of contentiousness. Builder groups came out against it, but certain reporters tried to sort of explain to readers what this was all about and what was being sought, and ultimately, it prevailed. So I guess I think at the end of the day, while yes, whether it's having to connect on Facebook or Twitter, or newspapers online, on the evening news. There are different platforms, but at the end of the day, it's still returning to trying to connect to individuals on the most basic human levels, and I think that can be done with land use issues.
Thank you. Michael? I'll get you.
Great points, and I'm delighted to be here as well. I represent a person who, or a group, or a point of view that is part of the projects that are out there. I have to say that in the 40 years of my career, 30 to 40 years of my career, I've been covered very well by the press, nationally, internationally, New York Times, journals, et cetera, et cetera. What's fascinating to me is the projects we've done over many of those years have been at the cutting edge of change in planning and certainly public works, infrastructure, what it is to be an artist in this culture, what that meaning could be. But what's fascinating is that on a local level, where the projects are actually happening, they're very seldom covered. And I think they represent point of view that is being talked about here, especially from the press folks, as really vital to the community's well-being and health. So what I've done is I've put together just a series of projects that we're doing and have done, completed, or in the works in this region. And they lay out a series of opportunities and questions that I want to bring up. Let me just go back. So in the first one is your solid waste authority. I mean, who are these people? They're our heroes. I actually think these people are extremely important in our culture. They pick up our garbage, etc. And their plans can actually have tremendous effect on us, especially when they want to do something that relates in not my backyard. That gets press attention. And sure, why should this be in anybody's backyard? Environmental Defense Fund invited us to show how infrastructure and communities had to become part of each other and not a separate entity, not within boundaries in a community, but actually crossing those boundaries. So we question the assumptions of what is a waste facility. And our project in Phoenix in the 1990s, so that's already now almost 20 years ago, becomes one of the 8 most important architectural events from the New York Times Best of the Year list. It's a dump, and it's designed by an artist, but it changes the way public works people think about infrastructure in communities and has led to very different thinking about the role of planning and design in some of the most basic things that help us live. Oh, don't you love this? Landfill becomes center of culture. This was, I mean, of all my career, this was a local article. They also called the Phoenix Project by the Taj Mahal of garbage because it looked so good they couldn't believe that we actually built it for 20% under its original budget that the public had bought a bond for. And then they clarified that and wrote an apology. But landfill to become center of culture. Wow. Wouldn't you love to see that in the whatever paper you have here? So what is a power plant? Essential to our lives as well. Well, if it's this, Yes, the press is going to write about it if one's going to come in your area. But what happens if one needs to come in our area, and what can it be? So planning interactive networks. This is part of what you study in planning. This is part of a whole new idea about how community works that are essential to us can come together and be part of our lives. How do you put together networks? I'm not going to go into explanations of these. You can see them on our website, and I'll be glad to talk to you afterwards. But here you are, right in town, right here in our region. Where is the press coverage for the Solid Waste Authority of West Palm Beach? Again, heroes from my perspective of what they've done. We produce more waste in Palm Beach County than any county in this country. Where's it going? Well, here's a courageous public works official at the forefront of planning saying they will build the first one of these facilities, waste to energy, renewable energy now, by the way, if it's done in the right way and the way that they're going to do it with emissions controls that are higher than the European community and beyond standards in this country. They're setting something that's of national and international relevance, and yet the public doesn't know it, and the country doesn't know it, actually, and we really need to get that story out. You're talking about low carbon footprints, renewable energy, innovative site and building design. An artist has designed the $700 million facility. It's amazing. I don't know if anyone's here from planning in Coconut Creek, but if from my coming here and finding out what Coconut Creek's plan is, their master plan, it's a leader. It's a leader in this region. It's a leader in the nation. Very exciting folks there who are working on this. And they responded to doing their plan in relation to what might happen, what they want to see happen. So that's a very important piece. And then brought us to the table to help them with the Seminoles on, again, $1 billion resort. And what can the public expect from this? By the way, thank you, 1,000 Friends of Florida, for giving Coconut Creek a Better Community Award. I think that's part of some recognition, but they need more. So how can the public be better informed? Where's the press in this? Coconut Creek does receive that. What could they expect? Green technology in $1 billion project? Yes. How can that appear throughout the project? That's become part of the planning and expectation and will be built in the project. Part of it is a 5,000-car garage. What is a parking garage? How do we rethink facilities like this? How can that become part of news? New York Times reported on the parking garage in Miami, but I think that's an aesthetic story. There's a story of parking garages as agricultural facilities, as energy providers, as water collectors, etc. Oh gosh, the expected. Shopping centers. How does public and private sector come together in planning? How do you create an inspiration based on a developer bringing that forward rather than the government? So Whole Foods is a very interesting client to have, and one that asked us to show them how can a shopping center become vital to its community, and how can the outside of our stores begin to relate more to the public realm rather than just the one-size-fits-all. How do you do adaptive reuse for a site like this and design a new store and shopping center for Jacksonville that collects energy, water, etc.? How do you look at shopping plazas themselves as generators of good environmental health, planting systems, etc.? How do you take a park, an urban park in West Palm Beach, bring an artist to the table with the planning organizations in the county and the state, and design something that then becomes an opportunity to change what is, just very ho-hum. We could be in Missouri, not Florida, for this grassy area. And how does it become part of something that can get funded and actually be realized? It's in construction now through federal flood prevention and become part of an urban system and a recreation area. How do the docks, the piers, of which we see so many of, how can a pier become an environmental regenerator? But yet there's no one who really understands what this place is doing. and the place is actually planting water, etc.